Okay, so in this tutorial we're going to focus on skinning, which is the process of attaching the model to the skeleton so that as the skeleton joints are rotated, it deforms the model in an anatomically correct manner. There are several ways to go about skinning a character in Maya. We're going to stick with classic skinning, the most basic way to skin a model to a skeleton, because I think it's important to understand skinning on its most basic level before you try to work with the newer approaches for skinning a character, which really don't change the way that the model is connected to the skeleton. There are simply newer ways to go about painting the skin weights. I'm going to stick strictly with classic skinning, where we're going to use a grayscale map to define how each joint should affect the area of the model that it's closest to. We're also not going to go over any muscle systems. Maya offers a way to attach NURBS models that represent the muscles in the body to the skin so that those muscles stretch and compress as the skeleton is rotated, and in turn those muscles deform the skin in a much more anatomically accurate way. If you want to experiment with muscle systems, feel free. I'll warn you, they're computationally expensive. Setting up an entire character with even a basic estimation of the major muscle groups in the body would severely tax your system. So if you do want to experiment with Maya's muscle system, I would suggest you set up a simple cylinder and a 3-joint chain and focus on experimenting with a basic bicep muscle that will stretch as the arm straightens and compress as the elbow bends, just to get a sense of how that will work. But for this project, in this course, this tutorial, we're going to stick strictly with the basic grayscale map skinning. But before we get into the steps involved in skinning a character, and there's a fair number of steps that you have to undertake before you begin skinning, before you bind the model to the skeleton, so that you can then go about the process of painting the skin weights effectively and efficiently. I'm going to try to explain the basic way that skinning works, because I think if you can understand the basic relationship that you're setting up here, it'll be easier for you to troubleshoot any issues that you run into. So in broad terms, the way that smooth skinning works in Maya is that the vertices on the model are given a weight value from 0 to 1, where 0 is no effect and 1 is full effect, and those weights are allocated to the different joints on the model that are close to that vertex. So for example, this vertex here in front of the shoulder will be weighted partly to the left arm joint here and partly to the left arm roll joint here, and then partly to the spine joint as well, because when the arm bends, this part of the model where this vertex lies is going to be affected by the rotation of the shoulder joint, the left arm joint, by the twisting of the upper arm, so by the left arm roll joint, and partly by the bending of the upper spine. This vertex here that's at the bicep will be weighted partly to the left arm roll joint, because when the upper arm twists, this vertex will be affected to a degree, to the left forearm joint, because when the elbow bends, that vertex will also be affected, and then partly to the left forearm joint, the elbow joint, because when the elbow bends, it will affect this vertex as well. This vertex here at the top of the forearm will be weighted partly to the left forearm or the elbow joint, partly to the left forearm roll joint, because it will be affected both when the elbow is rotated and when the forearm is twisted. And those values from 0 to 1 can be described as a grayscale map, where 0 is black and 1 is white, and values between 0 and 1 are shades of gray. So lower values closer to 0 will be darker, closer to black, and values closer to 1 will be whiter. And that, in essence, is how smooth skinning works. The vertices on the model are weighted to different joints based on their proximity to that vertex. They're assigned values from 0 to 1, so that each vertex's total value adds up to 1. So this vertex here on the top of the forearm might be weighted 0.7 to the left forearm or the elbow joint, and 0.3 to the left forearm roll joint, or the forearm twist joint, and those values are transcribed into grayscale texture maps, where 0 equals black, 1 equals white, and all the values between 0 and 1 are different shades of gray. But because smooth skinning relies on textures to assign those values to the vertices, we have to ensure that our models are comprised of non-overlapping UVs before we begin skinning. Now you can skin a model without non-overlapping UVs, but what you can't do is export those skin maps and then re-import them onto the model unless you have non-overlapping UVs. And that's really important because you're going to put a lot of time into this skinning process, and you don't want to lose that work if you find that your joint locations are off, which is a very common event for a first-time rigger. You might find that the shoulder joint is too far into the arm, or the forearm twist joint is too close to the wrist. And if you wanted to fix those joint placement issues, you don't want to lose all of that skinning work. So if you start the model with non-overlapping UVs, even if you then have to completely redo the rigging and adjust those joint locations, you can simply export the skin maps before you do that, fix the joint placements, and re-rig the skeleton, and then re-import those skin maps without losing any of that skin weighting. So this model that I've set up already has non-overlapping UVs, which you can find in the Windows Modeling Editor's UV editor. And you can see here that I've already mapped this model so that there are no overlapping UVs. So if I right-click over the model in the UV editor and choose Faces, and then select Overlapping UVs, you'll see that no faces have been selected. And that lets you know that there are no overlapping UVs on the model. So this model is already ready for you to begin skinning, and you'll be able to export the skin maps and re-import them if you have to fix the placement of your joints or fix the rigging of your skeleton in any way. And exporting your skin maps, once you've skinned the model, skin and export weight maps. And then when you're ready to re-import them, you simply rebind the model, select the model, go back to that same skin menu, and import the weight maps from wherever you saved them. But I'll demonstrate that in a little while. Now, before you skin your model as well, if you were to have modeled this character yourself, modeling builds up what's called construction history. So when you add edges, when you extrude faces, you're building up construction history. And before you begin skinning, you want to delete that history on the model, because otherwise the skinning has to run through all of those history nodes as it calculates the weighting of the skin. So there's no history on this model, but if you had some from modeling your own character, you would simply select it, go to Edit, Delete by Type, and History. So we're not going to bind the model to every joint in the skeleton because, as we discussed, the last joint in every chain is not involved in the animation or the skinning. But for our character, theoretically, we have a neck and head that continues after this. So we're going to bind to the spine 5 joint, spine 6 joint, neck joint, the left shoulder, left arm roll, left forearm roll, left hand, middle 1, 2, and 3, index 1, 2, and 3, ring 1, 2, and 3, pinky 1, 2, and 3, and then thumb 1, 2, and 3. So with all those joints selected, again, I could also select them in my hypergraph. And you can see I've selected only the original arm chain, not the control joints that we created for the IK chain. So just the original joint chain and all of the joints except the last joint in each of the fingers and the thumb. So with those selected, I'll shift select the model and then go to Skin and open up the Bind Skin option box. So since we're not skinning to every joint in the skeleton, I want to make sure that I choose to bind to only selected joints. I'll keep closest distance, which will ensure that the vertices are weighted to the joints that are closest to them in distance. We'll choose the skinning method as dual quaternion, because that produces a better result when the joints are twisted. So for the upper and lower arm, that will produce a better result. I'm going to suggest that you set the max influences to 4, and that determines how many joints to which any vertex can be weighted on the model. And you can see that there are probably some examples on the model where some vertices will be in fact affected by 4 joints. So this ones in the shoulders will be affected by the last spine joint, the left shoulder, the left arm, and then the left arm roll. So 4 is the maximum I would suggest you go with. And then we'll leave all of these options checked. Colorize skeleton will color each joint involved in the bind a different color, and then color the vertices associated with those joints the same color. And that makes it a little bit easier to recognize which vertices are being affected by which joints. And then once you get these settings set up the way that you want them, it's a good idea to save them. So in each option box in Maya, you can choose to save or reset the settings. So I'm going to save these settings so I don't have to worry about setting them again. And then I'll click Bind Skin. And you'll see if we start posing the arm control that I've already gotten a decent result by default. But now I'm going to go through the process of painting the skin weights to make sure that I get exactly the deformations that I'm looking for. Because you'll see if we start working with the hand, they're not going to be perfect. It's going to be some pulling in some areas, some stretching in other areas. So you can see that the elbow, which is always a tricky spot for skinning, has this sort of rubbery effect in the front where there's too much depression in the front of the elbow, too much rounding in the back. And then the shoulder, as it goes down, is pushing in too much into the chest and torso. So I'm going to paint the skin weights to help produce a better result and get exactly the deformations that I'm after. And then before you start painting the weights, it's a good idea to select the model, go to the skin menu, and first normalize the weights, and then to also prune small weights, which will get rid of any vertices that are weighted 0.0001 and just set them to 0. So if I were to select any vertex on the model now, and I'll select this one in the front of the bicep again, I could go to my Windows, General Editors, Component Editor, scroll down to my Smooth Skins tab, and I could see how this particular vertex is weighted. So you can see that the default skinning gave it a value of 0.230 to the left arm joint, 0.669 to the left arm roll joint, 0.085 to the left forearm joint, and then 0.016 to the left forearm roll joint. And like I said, all of those numbers will always add up to 1. So what the smooth binding process did when we initiated it is that it took every vertex on the model and allocated weights to it from 0 to 1 for various joints that are in proximity to that particular vertex. So this vertex in front of the bicep is close to those 4 joints, and that's why it's given those weights. Now to get the exact weighting I want, I could change these values in the component editor here. But obviously it's very difficult for me to determine from 0 to 1 what value each joint should be assigned for this particular vertex. So we have a visual way to adjust the skin weighting using the Paint Skin Weights tool. So we'll be painting our skin weights exclusively with the Paint Skin Weights tool. And we get to that by selecting the model and going to Skin, Paint Skin Weights, and open up the option box. And you can see that all of the joints that we included in the bind are listed here, and that each joint has this padlock symbol to the left. And the way that it works is that when you see this padlock in the open symbol, that means that the values that are assigned to that particular joint can be changed by using this brush tool to either replace, add, scale, which is the inverse of add, it reduces weights as you paint it, or smooth, which averages the weights between the joints. When you click the padlock button for any joint, that joint is now locked, and the weights that are assigned to that particular joint can no longer be changed. So for any joint that's unlocked, as you use this Paint Skin Weights tool, the values can be changed for any joint that's unlocked. And once we block out the skin weights, as we will in a moment here, we're going to want to lock everything but 1, 2, or possibly 3 joints at a time so that we're not inadvertently weighting vertices to joints that we don't want them to be weighted to. So before we start smoothing or adding or subtracting small weights from one joint or another, I'm going to suggest you first block out the weights by assigning every joint a value of 1 to one and only one joint. And that will make it easier for you to paint the skin weights after that. And I think this is particularly important if this is your first time painting the skin weights for a bound character. So what I'll do is I'll leave all of the joints unlocked. So you can see that all of the joints involved in my bind are currently unlocked. They all have this unlock symbol here. And I'll set the paint operation to replace. And that means that as I paint, whatever value I have set here, and I have it set to 1, I will be replacing the values for the vertices I paint over with a value of 1 for whatever joint is selected. So I'll start with the spine 5, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint all of the values that are in that area of the model so that they're weighted 100% or 1, this value of 1, to this spine 5 joint. To increase the size of the brush, you hold down the B key on your keyboard, B as in Bravo, and then drag it with your left mouse button. So you can see as I paint here, these values are changing from gray or black to white. So I want to make sure that I get all of these vertices in this bottom part of the torso. Then I'll move on to spine 6. And I'm just going to paint the front and the back here because the rest of the arm will be weighted more to the left arm joint. You want to be thorough here and make sure you get everything that you want. And then I'll go down to neck here. I'm going to intentionally paint some areas that I don't want. So if I were to inadvertently paint those to the neck and I don't want those, I can go back up to my spine 6 and repaint that area white for spine 6. So you really can't make a mistake here that can't be fixed. Then I'll move on to the left shoulder, and I'm just going to paint this area up here to the left shoulder, and then the left arm. And because I'm going to be moving down through the arm as I go, I don't really need to worry about going too far down the arm, because each time I move on to the next joint and start painting, I'll be overriding anything that I paint over with the subsequent joints. I can simply go back and fix anything that I inadvertently paint that I don't want. And times you'll see it's easier to use a larger brush size, and at other times you'll want to use a smaller one. And again, simply holding down B and dragging to the left decreases the size of the brush, and holding down B and dragging to the right increases the size. You can also select vertices and then flood the selection using the flood button here in the Paint Skin Weights tool. But in order to select vertices in my scene here, I'll need to hide the joints and the IK handles temporarily, because in Maya there's something called selection hierarchy. And if I were to try to right click over my model and choose vertices and just scroll over it, you'll see it will select either the IK handle or the joints, because both joints and IK handles have selection hierarchy over vertices and even models. So I'm going to hide my joints in my show menu for the view panel. And again, every view panel has its own show menu. So I'll uncheck joints and uncheck IK handles as well. And now I can right click over the model and choose vertices. I'm just going to select all of the vertices that encompass the hand. And then back into my Paint Skin Weights tool. And first I'm going to select the hand. And then I'll just flood it. And what this is going to do is it's going to flood the selection, these particular vertices, because that's what I have selected, and replace their value with a value of 1. And now I can go and do that same process for the fingers. So I'll start with the middle. So I'm going to select some of the vertices here. And then I'm going to use the hotkey to grow the selection. So when you have vertices or edges or faces and you want to grow the selection, the hotkey is Shift and right arrow. So the arrow pointing towards the right will grow the selection. The arrow pointing to the left will shrink the selection. So I'm just going to grow this selection to get all of the vertices in the fingers. Deselect the ones I don't want. That looks good. Now back into my Paint Skin Weights tool, and I'll go down to middle one and flood this, and then just select the vertices that I want to flood for middle two. Select middle two, flood those, and then just the ones I want for middle three. Select middle three, flood those. And then I'll go through the same process for each of the other fingers. Make sure I have just the ones that I want. Index 1. Index 2. Ring 1. Ring 2. Ring 3. Pinky 1. Pinky 2. Pinky 3. And then the thumb. Thumb 1. Thumb 2. And then thumb 3. Okay, so now I've blocked out these weights so that every vertex on the model is assigned a value of 1 to one and only one joint. And you'll see now that the skinning looks very blocky, but now I can go through and paint the skin weights much easier. So let me save this. So in order to start painting these skin weights, I need to set some keyframes so that I can scroll through my timeline and have the arm move while I'm painting the weights. Show my joints again. I'll start with the second spine joint. I'll just select that. Press S to set a first keyframe on the first frame of my animation. Scroll down, it doesn't really matter how far, and have the torso bend forward at that spine. Press S to set another keyframe. And that way I can drag through my timeline as I'm painting the skin weights. So now I'll select my model again, go back to my Paint Skin Weights tool. And now I want to lock everything but the two joints that I'm working with. So in this case, spine 5 and spine 6 are the ones that are being affected by the animation that I have here. So I'm going to lock everything but spine 5 and spine 6. So I'll select left shoulder, hold down Shift, to select all of those, and then click the lock button. You'll see now that symbol changes to a locked padlock to let me know that all of the weights for these joints that are locked, they can't be changed. So now I'm going to go up to spine 6, set my operation to smooth, and just start to smooth out these weights a bit. I can do the same thing with spine 5. Now I'm going to select the same joint and change this last keyframe so that it's rotating in the other direction. Press S to set another keyframe. Go back to my skin weights tool and smooth this out a bit. Looks pretty good. So I want to get rid of this animation now, so I just select the same joint, hold down Shift and drag over both keyframes in my timeline, right click and choose Delete. Now I'll set some animation for the neck, so S to set the first keyframe, and then have it stretch a bit. Set another keyframe with S. Go back into my Paint Skin Weights tool, and this time I'm going to lock spine 5 and unlock neck. And I'll smooth between neck and spine 6. And then lock spine 6 and unlock left shoulder and smooth that out a little bit. You might say, okay, this is stretching up too much. So here's a case where I'm going to start working with some of the other operations of the Skin Weights tool. So I'm going to start adding some of these weights to spine 6 to get it to come down a little bit more. So I'm going to unlock spine 6, set my operation to add, and set my value to something low like 0.1. And then each time I paint, I'm adding that amount of value to the selected joint. And that will bring down these vertices a little bit so I can get a better result. I'm going to add a little bit to here as well. And that looks pretty good. And now I'll move on to the arm. So I'm going to lock spine 6, lock the neck, and unlock the left arm. So I'm going to get rid of the animation for the neck. So select the neck, hold down Shift and drag over the keyframes, delete. And this time I'm going to set some animation on the L arm control. So set the first keyframe, and now I'm going to move it down. Set another keyframe with S. Smooth this on the top between left arm and left shoulder. Then I'll lock left shoulder, unlock spine 6, and smooth this out a bit. So I'm going to add a little bit here to the left arm to push this in a bit. And then add a little bit to spine 6 to push this out. and then smooth it again. Looks pretty good. So now I'm going to set another keyframe, and you can move through your keyframes with these buttons here on your time controls. You can move forward or back from each keyframe. So this time I'm going to move it up. S to set another keyframe and override the other one. Back into my Paint Skin Weights tool. Smooth this out a bit. Lock spine 6, unlocks left shoulder. Smooth this out. And that looks pretty good. Set a keyframe. Is it pushed back? Lock the shoulder, unlock spine 6. And I'll add some weight to the arm here. Again, 0.1, a nice low value. Push that in a bit. And then smooth it out again. So that looks pretty good. Save this. And then set a keyframe so it's in the front. Add some small weight again to push this area in with the arm. And then smooth it out. And that looks pretty good. Save that. Delete this keyframe. Now I'm going to animate the arm twist. Set a keyframe for that. Now I'm going to lock spine 6 and unlock just left arm and left arm roll, which is that twist joint. And then smooth this. Just take a look at how this looks as I twist it. Looks pretty good. Delete that keyframe. Set one for the elbow bend. Come on, lock left arm and just unlock left forearm roll and left forearm. Smooth this a little bit. And the elbow is a difficult part of the skinning because you want a nice sharp angle, or fairly sharp angle in the back, and then the front, it compresses. You want to have a nice compression here, but you don't want too much penetration between the front and the back. Add a little bit to the left arm roll to push this area forward a little bit. So I want the left arm roll joint to push this area forward a little bit, and then have this left forearm push the bicep area back a little bit, and then smooth. See how that looks. And again, if you look at your elbow as you bend it, you'll see at the skin in the front with the bicep and the forearm, it does compress as your elbow bends, and you want the back to be nice and sharp. So that looks pretty good in the front. I'm going to add a little bit of weight to pull the tricep towards the elbow a little bit. So I'm going to add a little bit of weight to the forearm joint to pull the tricep towards the elbow to sharpen that angle a little bit. And then pull the back of the forearm towards the elbow with the left arm roll. Smooth it out a little bit. And that looks pretty good. So I'll save this. Get rid of this keyframe here. And then animate the wrist twist for the forearm. So I'm going to lock the left arm roll. Unlock the forearm roll. Smooth this out a bit. Take a look at this, how this looks as I twist it. That looks pretty good. Get rid of this keyframe. Save this. And I would suggest you save often because skinning has a tendency to crash, particularly on machines without enough RAM. So I'll get rid of this keyframe and then animate the wrist wave. Set another keyframe with S. This time I'll lock the forearm and unlock only the left forearm roll and left hand. Smooth this out a bit. Animate it the other direction. Set another keyframe. Add a little bit of weight here. A little bit here. And then smooth that out. And we'll unlock the first thumb joint. And lock the left forearm roll. And then smooth out the hand a little bit. That looks pretty good. So save this. Get rid of this keyframe. And now animate the splay to fist. Set a keyframe for that. And I'll start with the pinky. So lock everything but the left hand and the pinky one. Smooth that out a bit. Lock the hand, unlock pinky 2. Smooth this out a bit. Now pinky 3. Add a little bit of weight here. Push this forward. Push this back a bit. Smooth this. And that looks pretty good. Save this. And this is the process that I would go through for each of the fingers until I get a result that I like. So to review, I would strongly advise you to block out the weights first by keeping them all unlocked and setting the paint operation to replace with a value of 1, and then paint each area so that every vertex is weighted 100% or 1 to 1 and only 1 joint. And once you've blocked out those weights, then you'll unlock only 2 or possibly 3 at a time when you want to paint that specific area. You're going to use largely smooth because that will average the weights between the unlocked joints, and that's the most common operation that you'll use as your skinning. But you'll also add some small weights to one joint or another. And then once you're finished, as we discussed, if you needed to adjust the joint locations or fix some aspect of the rigging that was broken and you didn't want to lose this time that you spent painting the skin weights, and why would you can simply select the model, go to Skin, and export skin weight maps. Open up the option box, and I would suggest you set this up to at least 512 because that's the size of the texture maps that will be created. If you had a very high-res character, you might up that to 1024 or even 2046 for a very high-resolution character. The lower resolution character, you can get away with 256, but for a character of this resolution, 512 will be fine. And then export. By default, it will take you into the source images directory for your default project. So I'm going to call this ARM Mesh Skin Weights. Press save. It will tell you it's going to write 23 skin maps because that's how many joints you have included in your bind. If you had fewer joints, it would create fewer skin maps. If you had more joints, it would create more skin maps. So now it's created a weight map file and 23 texture files. So if I navigate to my source images directory in my default Maya project, we'll see that we have 2 things created. We have a weight map, which I can open in Notepad. And this file is very simple. It simply lists the name of the model, which in this case is ARM Mesh. And then it lists each joint, starting with the first joint, Spine 5. And then it lists the name of the texture map that is associated with that joint. So Spine 5 is associated with ARM Mesh Spine 5.iff ARM Mesh. Spine 6 is associated with the file ARM Mesh _ Spine 6, and so on and so forth. And those files are in this folder called ARM Mesh Skin Weights. And I can open up any one of these files in Photoshop, and you'll see that it's based on the UV map that I showed you, that I created for the model. And you can see this particular file is for the left arm joint, so that's the shoulder joint. And you can see that the area that's aligned with that part of the model, that area that corresponds to the shoulder area of the model, is hottest or whitest, because those joints are weighted 100% or close to 100% to that left arm joint. And then you can see that the values get closer to black as they go out. And then out to the areas that aren't near the shoulder area, those are black. And every one of these texture files is based on the same UV map for that model, and the grayscale values on those maps will correspond to the areas that are painted on the model for that particular joint. And that's the way that exporting skin maps works. So if I needed to fix the joint placements or fix the rigging for any reason, I would simply unbind the mesh by selecting the model and choosing Unbind Skin, and that will get rid of the connection between the model and the joints. I would redo the skeleton or fix the skeleton, fix any aspect of the rigging that needed fixing, and then once I've fixed the joint placements or the rigging, I would go through the same process of selecting all of the joints that I want to include in the bind, shift select the model, go to the bind skin again, and then I would select the model, go to skin, import weight maps, and navigate to where that weight map is on my computer. And that would import all of those weight maps back onto the model, and you wouldn't lose any of that skin weighting work that you did. Okay, so give this a shot. Again, if you have any questions, reach out to your instructor, and good luck.